Cornelia, I will start with you. The IMF report has cut its global economic growth forecast for this year to 3.1%, down from 3.4% before the conflict. That's not a surprise, is that, given the disruption in energy supply from the Gulf region?
It is absolutely not a surprise, because we have the largest energy shock essentially since the 70s. However, it's actually worse than just the 3.1%, because they have an adverse scenario which is 2.5%, and really bad the scenario which is 2%, and inflation is at 4.4%, or then 5.4% or 6%. So if this goes on for too long, we are really looking at a huge economic downturn.
Daniel, so some say the impact is comparable to the COVID or the Ukraine war. People would say there's already a carnage on the global economy. Even everything returns to normal very soon. That's the situation?
So it's probably far below disruption from COVID, at least at this point. Regarding the IMF forecast, any forecast typically has production lags. So the headline numbers that we talked about, the revision down to 3.1, only reflects the situation through early March, perhaps. So one should pay more attention to the alternate scenarios that they have outlined, which, like the severe scenario, is probably reflecting a blockage of the Strait of Hormuz for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. We are a couple of months in, and we're probably much closer to the middle scenario that Ms. Meyer just highlighted. So it is significant. What so far is not to the scale of disruption we saw during COVID is what's happening in the supply chains. It's still quite significant, and academic estimates of what drove the surge of inflation during 2021, 2022 was partly due to the breakout of war in Ukraine, but the large impulse was from supply chain disruptions. So good news, quote unquote, is that supply disruptions so far are much weaker than what we saw during COVID restrictions. But still, those will probably be significant and contribute to inflation far beyond what just could happen mechanically due to higher energy prices.
Well, John, given recent developments such as the U.S. blockade against the Iranian blockade, at least we are not clear yet when this blockade, when will the strait, will be open. So, just as Daniel and Cornelia has mentioned, that we're already moving forward, toward to the more serious ones with more downsides, because we are approaching to the, let's say, 2 months line of the start of the war.
Well, first of all, let me say that IMF's forecast probably for a global situation probably hides the complexity and the severe impact on many poor countries, I would say, because these countries are experiencing not just a high oil price, but also facing shortages of fertilizers, for example, and other commodities that are vital to a lot of people in these poor countries. And there are historical precedents, very unfortunate historic precedents, that sometimes there will be political implications in these countries, and even unrest. So that's even more of a dire consequence than, I think, the IMF's forecast for the global economy at the aggregate level. Now, having said that, I am still quite hopeful this thing can be winding down relatively quickly. I think it's very clear from the statements from both sides after the negotiation in Pakistan that there would be genuine interest in stopping this war. I think it's pretty clear from the Iranian side. So I think there's some hope, and also judging from the quite upbeat statement from J.D. Vance just 2 days ago, I think there might be a chance that we are getting very close to a settlement for this. I think the issue is really about the enrichment, uranium enrichment timing. I think the Iranian side said very clearly they're not interested in nuclear weapons, but it's their right to maintaining this capability, but they can stop doing this for a period of time, and the dispute is over how many years. They're asking for 10 years. The United States, no way, you can get 10 years for that. So I think there's some hope that this thing probably can be reached maybe within weeks.
Let's hope for the best. Cornelia, under this worst-case scenario provided by the IMF, it warns oil prices average about $110 a barrel this year and $125 in 2027. The global economy could teeter on the brink of a global recession, pushing global growth down to 2% and sending inflation up to 6%. If we were to see that kind of scenario play out, what would that actually mean in practical terms for the global economy?
Well, thank you. And this is very true. If this scenario happened, we would be looking at a full-blown recession. And as Professor Dong said, the worst hit will be the developing countries. You have seen, and especially what really worries me, there's oil and there's LNG. Obviously, LNG is 20% of LNG has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Oil has some other ways because there's some pipelines. But when I look at fertilizer, gas equals fertilizer, like 30% of nitrogen-based fertilizer has to pass through the straits. We now are in the planting season in the Northern Hemisphere. So we will only know, even if we stop now, we will only know by autumn, how badly crops are affected. And that has real ramifications for developing countries. If this gets really bad, I can see famines. I mean, it's really quite bad. I'm also very concerned about the bidding war that we will see for LNG, because quite a bit of LNG has been 17% of Qatari production has been taken out for 3 to 5 years. So you will see a bidding war between Asia and Europe for cargoes. Now, what does that mean for the Pakistans of this world, for the Bangladeshis of this world, who really suffered when we had the last LNG shortage or gas shortage because of the Russian war, and they couldn't get the gas the LNG they so direly needed because they were outbid by the richer countries.
Picking up what being said by the previous two guests, Daniel, of course, it would be bad, in particular to the developing countries. What about the impact on the developed economies like the U.S.? U.S. exports oil and gas. What about the impact to individual consumers, on the daily basis? Is inflation increase acceptable? People somehow can stomach that?
I mean,
well, if you're talking, who are you going to?
Yeah, Daniel, please. Yeah.
Okay.
People always hate inflation, and that's definitely going to have political ramifications for the current party in power. We have some estimates of what it would take to tip U.S. economy into recession, and these are pretty shaky given that the energy structure of the U.S. economy has changed, and a lot of historical data goes further back when U.S. was a net importer of oil. So it would probably take a sustained level of prices of around $150 per gallon per barrel at the U.S. side. Anything below is probably going to get us close to recession, and it's going to be a slowdown in demand, while some sectors compensate. So U.S. is a large net exporter of energy, a big exporter of LNG with fast growing capacity, and probably stands to benefit at least parts of the country. So consumers, on the other hand, will probably not be happy. So over the past couple of years, a lot of growth was driven by richer consumers who enjoyed rising stock market indices, which will definitely suffer if oil prices go as high as 150. Mm-hmm. Additionally, a lot of the middle class is already been squeezed by a lot higher prices.
Yeah, well, of course, Daniel in the U.S.,
COVID,
thinking
and
of
basically is going to have to tighten its.
Right, so that will be an impact on the consumers, given that the upcoming midterm elections, so that will be an even political impact inside the U.S., right?
So it's from the economic standpoint, inflation, which hurts like everybody but broadly, is probably the worst outcome than having a large, not large, some increase in unemployment. Because when it's better to stay employed and have a little bit of a income decrease than to lose a lot of income for a small percentage of people. But again, as around the world, this will not hit everybody equally. People on the lower end of income distribution spend more time, larger share of their budget on food and energy, and they will bear the brunt of whatever comes next if there is an adverse scenario. Mm-hmm. People on the upper end probably have enough savings to cope.
Right. So Cornelia, oil prices have gone about $100 per barrel. Natural gas has spiked more than 80%. Fertilizer prices are raising costs for farmers, as we mentioned. Even in a more optimistic scenario in which the war concludes rather quickly, the Strait of Hormuz reopens. According to the IMF, people would wonder, is this still a typical geopolitical shock that will pass rather quickly? Or are we looking at something more structural that could reshape the global economy over the next few years?
Well, first of all, when you compare it to the shock of COVID, that was a demand side shock. This is supply side shock. And demand side shock is easier because demand comes back on and you'll get there. But this is a supply side shock, which will be hard. Which will be hard, especially on LNG, on Qatar. Some of these oil fields had to be shut in because they all had nowhere to go and there was no storage left. So that will take time. We will have to see how the world assesses the geopolitical stability of the Strait of Hormuz and of getting polyethylenes, all the chemical, the petrochemical inputs, the fertilizer, the solids and the fluids out of the strait. So a lot will depend on really what sort of regime we can get for the Strait of Hormuz. Will it revert to an international waterway, which is guided by the UN law of the seas and by the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, also a sub-organization of the UN? Will it be a regional solution where countries work together, GCC countries and Iran work together to give free passage? But a lot of it will depend on how industry, how the world looks at the free passage through Hormuz. If they're worried that there could be the next incident that shuts everything in again, then we'll see serious realignment.
So it depends, John. But if you look at this. These high prices of oil and gas and then related products, for example, steel and cement, that will push up the costs across the economy. Right. Everything will be, in terms of the price, be higher. Right. So, if you look at the response from the governments, in particular central banks, right. Are they going to increase raise the interests? And so we are going to see tighter policy just as the growth is slowing down.
Well, Well, first of all, let me say that I do see structural change, even if we have a peace settlement very soon after this conflict ends. I think the world starts to realize that oil supply is not safe, it's not secure. It's very much subject to perturbation and easily can be flared up by something that's happening in the Middle East. So I think there's a general trend towards transition towards renewable energies, particularly I think in Europe. And also in countries like Japan and
also
South
in
Korea.
Asia.
South Korea and Japan and other,
Pakistan,
more industrialized countries in Asia as well. And China, of course, stands to benefit from this because we are the leaders in these renewable energies, right? And China itself is actually transitioning very fast towards renewable energies. I think the people in the world learned a very hard lesson this time. So I would imagine that this is the mindset on a lot of politicians across the world. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing about the issue you just raised, what's the central bank is going to do? Well, I think they're very concerned about decreasing interest rates, even though at this time we need to beef up the economy and decrease interest rates. But the problem is that we have to fight inflation as well.
Yes.
And in the United States, inflation is actually very high in my view. I came back to the United States 3 weeks ago, and I started to realize how much more expensive these days over there. And it's going to hurt a lot of people in the lower stratum of society whose wages haven't been rising accordingly. And these people are very angry, I would say. I think a lot of people in America are very angry these days. And I tell you, it's going to be reflected in the midterm election. It's going to be around the corner within a few months, and people will remember this. And they realize that they voted a president very much on the banner that he's not going to be staging these kind of wars. And as a matter of fact, it's precisely the opposite what he promised to the American electorates. So I think it's going to be a reckoning in the midterm election. And we're going to see what's going to happen moving forward in the United States political situation.
Then, what about the response? We talk about the impact will be probably more felt in the developing countries because of say the currencies and also devalued probably, and they don't have this financial resources to deal with the shock. Like developed economies.
I mean, a lot of low-income countries with a population who are barely sort of relying on substance level living and not have the cushion to weather through this kind of difficulties, and you see people getting poorer, small business going bankrupt. And as I said, there's going to be political unrest in some of these countries. And there are actually precedents in history in the past for something like this. Like in North Africa, Tunisia started its revolution just precisely because of this, right? As a matter of fact, even the unrest in Iran a few weeks ago is very much driven by the economic hardship suffered by the people. So I think, we're going to see these kind of political implications, political unrests popping up somewhere in the world. I can't believe there's nothing happening because of this very profound impact President Trump introduced to the world.
Right. Cornelia, if you look at China, China is the world's largest energy importer and also a key player in global trade. So China is, people would say, is both vulnerable to the energy shock. At the same time, China has, potentially influential. I mean, how is China positioned in this crisis?
China is positioned extremely well, and yes, it's the largest energy importer. It also has underground storage, a lot of oil. I mean, the government did a fine job buying oil when it was cheap and putting in underground storage, which gives them a little bit of wherewithal. So China is actually well positioned. China is also well positioned through other networks. There's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The BRICS matter less than this one, but the Shanghai Cooperation Organization matters, right? You have India in there, you have Pakistan in there, you have Iran in there, you have with Pakistan the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So China is very influential with a lot of players that actually matter, much more so than the US is. So China is well positioned, and it will probably come out stronger out of this than before. And as Professor Wong said, China is also a leader in renewable energy. I'm not as gung-ho on renewable energy as Professor Gong is, because we still need the base loaders and we still need the petrochemical inputs. So we may see less oil for some things, but for transportation, we still need oil. We still need base loaders, because sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow, and we need the petrochemicals. So there is a future for oil, but where we source it and how it will be sourced, that is the difference. But all in all, politically, China will come out stronger. And you saw President Xi Jinping being very presidential with these latest visits with the Spanish PM, with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, with Mr. Lavrov from Russia. He's really a voice of reason here.
Well, speak of Russia, Daniel, many people say Russia is the winner of the Iran war because there's a lifting of sanctions. And if you look at what's happening on the ground, you have Thailand, I think, official in Moscow basically asking for more export of oil and gas from Russia. And I think the Philippines, they have sent a request to Washington for approval to purchase more oil and gas from Russia. So that is the case. Do you agree Russia is benefiting from the situation here?
I mean, it could turn out to be the case, but it's far from certain. A lot of Russia's oil is landlocked and has to use sea routes through the Baltic Sea. We have recently seen significant damage to oil processing infrastructure around the ports of St. Petersburg. Basically from Iranian drone attacks, and nobody knows if the Russia-Ukraine conflict could escalate, so that the European Union basically starts seizing more sanctioned tankers that are carrying Russian oil. So it's possible that Russia could benefit, but it could face bigger constraints in getting its oil through the markets. Unofficially, I'm hearing that some portion of Russian oil was actually making it to Iran through Caspian Sea and then to buyers through the Straits of Hormuz. So that's going to be restricted as long as the straits are blocked. Something I want to circle back to what you mentioned. You said that oil prices are around $100 a barrel. I want to stress that those are futures prices for physical delivery in June, and for some contracts like Brent, it doesn't even have physical delivery. So to look at the scale of the problem, you have to look at near-dated physical deliveries, and those prices are much higher. So I think for something within like 10 to 30-day delivery, you're looking at $130 dollars per barrel and higher. So let's not be a little bit complacent, because a lot of markets are expecting things not to last long, and that's why delivery contracts for June are around $100. But if things persist, those contracts will also rise.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, is there, of course, we lack, there's a shortage of supply from out of this Strait of Hormuz. Is that possible? Increase the production and then increase the supply from the U.S., from Venezuela, from Russia, so to fill the gap? Is that possible?
It's going to take time. So even in the case of Venezuela, it's probably going to take at least a year or two to ramp up significantly. OPEC could do more, but I mean, the bulk of OPEC is Saudi Arabia, and they are constrained by their pipeline capacity to the Red Sea. If things get dire, you can probably truck some amount of oil. It's going to be expensive, but it's a way to get oil to terminals, but they'll have to truck a lot of it. And longer term, there might be some realignment, but in the near term, it's going to be tough. Good thing that before the Iran war started, the oil market was looking at a permanent surplus. So there was some spare capacity, which is probably cushioning the impact that we are seeing right now. But if the disruption lasts months, it's going to be tough to replace the supply quickly.
Right. Cornelia, so it depends the time, how long it will last, right?
But it depends on how long it will last. And you had one thing before this war. You had OPEC play a very positive role in sort of ensuring stable markets. So if there's too much oil on the market, they would have lower quotas, so they would produce less. If there was not enough, they would release those quotas. But what we see, as I think it was Professor Gong said, the spare capacity that we have is basically Saudi Arabia and a little bit UAE, and that's on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz. Looking at Venezuela, it will take a long time. This is a very difficult oil province, and the US, they can only do that much. There's Brazil, there's African producers. Yes, people can do more, but 20% of oil and oil products is a hefty number.
Yes. John, lastly, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in an interview that a small bit of economic pain may be worthwhile for long-term international security. What's your take on that?
Well, that's total nonsense. I mean, it's a political nonsense. This war is a war of choice. I don't see this fundamentally changing Iran's nuclear capability. It doesn't have the capability of developing nuclear weapons. It said it doesn't want to develop nuclear weapons. Its ballistic missile capabilities nowhere close to reaching the United States. So, as we all know it, this war is I think President Trump is swindled into this by Israel, from a point of view of international security, what has changed? It's made even worse in my view, and even for that we're actually paying not just a small little price. I think a lot of people are paying a lot higher price than Secretary Bessent is talking about.
Well, I mean, if the situation drags on for a couple of months or even a few months more, how should the policymakers do in response? Briefly, John.
That's a mind-boggling question. I don't think President Trump has a solution. He is just trying to, he's ignoring basically, I think. He is trying to wind things down and amidst a lot of resistance, in my view, from the Israelis. And he's also facing a lot of political pressure from his own political base. So I think it's a very difficult task on his part. But nevertheless, from what J.D. Vance has been saying so far, I still see a prospect of some kind of agreement can be reached, fairly soon.
Okay. Again, let's hope for the best. With that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qianduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.